Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You want Big Ten team win totals? We have Big Ten team win totals for you for the 2021 college football season in comparison to what we set versus the official lines from betonline.ag. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Big Ten podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Stevens. It is Friday, June 4th, and on today's episode, a couple days ago, we went over the Big Ten East. Today, we go over the Big Ten West. And who was here for the West Division originally to set those and approximate those numbers with me? It was Andrew Wade, the host of Locked On Hawkeyes. He is back to go over these numbers, compare them to BetOnline, and reiterate our thoughts on if we think now that the lines are official, the 7 teams in the Big Ten West Division will go over or under their numbers set from BetOnline for the 2021 season. Andrew Wade, as always, a pleasure to see you. Your mustache looks fantastic, by the way.
I like how we just talked about in the show. Yeah, no, it's looking good, man. Getting real thick in there. So I'm getting it trimmed up tomorrow, so it should be nice. But happy to be here, man. Excited to actually join you again. It's been a hot second since I've recorded a show or been on a show.
How is Locked On Hawkeyes doing at this point? What are you guys talking about?
Well, nothing for the last 2 weeks because I have not been able to do anything. But we came back yesterday with a whole Iowa baseball review with Kyle Huseman, who is the beat reporter for the Iowa baseball team, kind of giving a breakdown of the Iowa Hawkeyes. And then we had Kyle Huckstorf, who is a recruit for the Iowa Hawkeyes. He was on the show yesterday as well. Hoping to get with obviously the recruiting period kind of picking up. Iowa should probably get between, I would say, 10 and 12 commits in the next couple months. So hoping to get a lot of those guys on and keep us busy until we get to football season, man.
With a dead period coming to an end after over a year long on Tuesday night, which was midnight, which was technically Wednesday morning, June 2nd or 1st or whatever it was, regardless, with the dead period coming to an end, there's going to be a lot of recruiting news coming out over these next couple of weeks. As kids return to campuses for on-campus visits, there will be a lot of recruiting news. In my mind, nobody is better at bringing recruits on to hear their perspective about why they want to attend a school than Andrew Wade, the host of Locked On Hawkeyes. From basketball to football to baseball, Andrew Wade has had people on talking about why Iowa, why the Big Ten. So if you want to dive in, Locked On Hawkeyes, that is your host right there, Andrew Wade. But Andrew, as we look forward to the Big Ten football season, I think you bring up a good point. It's a little bit slow right now. So we look forward to the Big Ten football season to bring that optimism and a sense of positivity as we get ready for the fall. We, a couple weeks ago on this very podcast, set and approximated some numbers that we thought might be the Big Ten team win totals for the West Division. Did BetOnline learn from us? Maybe so, because Andrew Wade, out of these 7 teams in the Big Ten West Division, we were spot on with 3 of the numbers that were set that are the exact same that you see at BetOnline. I will go over those numbers now in comparison to what we had a few weeks ago and the official lines set out for the team win totals from BetOnline for the Big Ten West. We started, of course, at the top of the 2020 standings, and that was Northwestern. We set it at 6.5. BetOnline had it at 6. Then we went to Iowa, the team you cover. We set it at 8.5. So did BetOnline. Woo! Then we set Wisconsin at 9.5. BetOnline also 9.5 for Wisconsin. I set Minnesota, and this was a little bit of a debate we had, at 5.5. BetOnline has Minnesota at 7. That was one of the bigger misses we had in terms of overall numbers. Then Nebraska was at 5.5. BetOnline set it at 6. Then Purdue was 5.5, BetOnline at 5, and then we were both spot on for Illinois to round out the Big Ten West. We had it 3.5, so did BetOnline. There's a couple of juices there, and Andrew Wade, who is a betting man himself, understands the term juice. And when the book puts out juice for what you have to lay on the price for a bet, that indicates how the book feels about what they will receive for this bet and what is the most likely outcome. So, for instance, I said that Nebraska was set at 6 from BetOnline. The over there was minus 130. Pretty much saying the book expects it to go over 6 for Nebraska. They're trying to entice you to take the under or at least recoup some of their wins or whatever wagers or their handle, whatever it might be there. But Andrew Wade, let's start with our overall aspect. 3 of the 7, we got spot on. You and I have a bright future in odds making.
I feel like I really appreciate you bringing me in on that but I didn't set anything. I just gave you my prediction. So appreciate you including me on that, but that's 100%
It was a conversation. Was it not a little back and forth?
I conversed with you and gave you my thoughts, but I did not set those lines. So you just went on for 2 minutes about how we did all this awesome stuff. And I'm in the back sitting, I did nothing. I was like the backup quarterback who just rode Tom Brady's coattails to a Super Bowl. Like I didn't do anything. I almost cussed on the show. I didn't do a single thing, but happy to be here, man. Some of those lines are very interesting, though.
I will say, I say we because we are all part of the Big Ten community, and I think you did things. If I'm Spencer Petras, you're Alex Padilla. Is he the backup for Iowa?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Look at that, man. We're doing a bit, still a quarterback competition in sorts where we make each other better. I think that's what we did when we set our original guesstimated Big Ten team win totals for the West Division. But you were saying a couple of those numbers are interesting to you. Which ones from BetOnline jump off the page?
Nebraska and Minnesota's. Nebraska's being at 6 is such a predictable line because when I look at their schedule, I thought they would win probably 7 games, but every single year they've won 5. They've been right on the cusp of getting to that 6-win mark. That's kind of been where the program has been at. Having it at minus 130 to go over means they know Nebraska fans are going to be hyped up on this team, and they're going to want to take the over. They don't want to lose money on that. The smart person, though, you got to look at what Nebraska has done, and you got to look at the team and think maybe you go under on this one just because of the odds there. Minnesota, oh my gosh, I might have to go bet that today, though. I do not. You said 7.5, or is it 7?
7. I said it at 5.5 initially. We had some conversations with some Golden Gopher backers that were like, 5.5? Are you crazy? This is a 6, 7, possibly 8-win team. I think you took the over of the 5.5 that I set originally a few weeks ago. What do you feel about the 7 that was set officially by BetOnline?
I'm taking the under. I think they're probably at 6 wins. I just don't like this team. I know everyone's very excited about Muhammad Ibrahim, and also I understand Minnesota fans hate me, and that's understandable because I'm not a huge Minnesota fan myself. I don't like most of their fans, but I just don't think their team is that strong. They lost a lot of players. I'm not a big fan of Tanner Morgan. That usually gets me a lot of heat. What he does is great within a certain scheme and great when you have great talent around him, but he's lost so many good wide receivers, Tyler Johnson, Rashad Bateman. That's tough to lose those kind of guys. And I think when you go up against the Big Ten, especially the Big Ten West, there's a lot of very strong secondaries in that Big Ten West that he's not going to be able to throw all over. Iowa has one of the best secondaries. Wisconsin always has a very consistent secondary. These are the top 2 teams. You have to beat those guys. Northwestern always has a relatively strong defensive bend but don't break, who's not going to let Tanner Morgan go over the top. These are teams that Minnesota is going to struggle against. I just can't imagine them getting over that 6-win mark.
I said on the show originally because I got caught in the crossfire of a little Twitter debate among Minnesota fans, and I appreciate that at this time of the year that we can talk in May when we set these lines initially and now in June about team win totals for the 2021 college football season. I truly do. I think it's one of the best parts about the Big Ten community. I said on the show when we were doing it, I would take the under. Then I was like, you know what? I'd probably take the over. I'd go with 6, maybe even 7. As it stands at 7, I'd say it's more likely to be a push or an under than it is to go over the 7. And again, I'm not knocking Minnesota. They return a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. Their entire starting offensive line is pretty much back. But you'll notice a trend in college football this year with the ability due to the COVID year to have your eligibility reinstated and to keep that year. You're going to have a lot of returning talent back across the country in years that we haven't seen before. So having all of that back is not necessarily a huge advantage for Minnesota over other teams because a lot of other teams in the Big Ten and beyond have a lot of returning production. Yes, having Tanner Morgan is back is huge. Yes, having the Big Ten running back of the year and Mo Ibrahim is huge. Having Chris Ottman-Bell back is huge, but you lose Rashad Bateman. So on the offensive side of the ball, I think they'll be fine. I think they will be able to have some good things happen under Mike Sanford Jr., and I think the offense will look more like it did in 2019. The defense was terrible last year in 2020, and it was a weird compacted year with some COVID issues on Minnesota, and they had to fill in some gaps for some guys that were not ready. They gained that experience last year. They went through those lumps. How does it translate to 2021? I need to see it before I believe it because it was so bad last year that I think that's a gaping hole on the defensive side for Minnesota. So unless that's completely flipped on its head and they're 100% better, then I still think this is a 6-win team, potentially 7, but nothing more than that. Look at their schedule. It starts off the first game of the year in the Big Ten Conference, well, not the first game because Nebraska and Illinois play in week 0, but the first game of week number 1 on a Thursday night hosting Ohio State. Then they have Colorado on the road. That will be a tough test with a Pac-12 opponent. They open up the rest of the Big Ten portion of play on the road at Purdue. Never easy. Nebraska at home, Maryland at Northwestern, at Indiana, at Iowa, and then they end the year with Wisconsin. That's a tough schedule. If they get 6 wins out of that, I think that's a great job by PJ Fleck to bounce back from where Minnesota was in 2020. I just don't know if I see it as of yet to go over 7 with how bad that defense was.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at that first bit of the schedule, there's only 2 games where I say Minnesota should be favored and will win that game, right? I think Ohio State is definitely a loss. Going at Colorado, probably a loss. At Purdue, Purdue's a sneaky team, and especially against a bad defense, that's tough. I'm actually slightly higher on Nebraska than a lot of people would expect, and I actually really like what Maryland did last year in certain games. Having two, I always mess up. So I'm just gonna say Tua's little brother because I always mess up.
Tagovailoa.
Yeah, I'm just bad with names, and I'm trying not to piss off too many people. I know Minnesota fans probably see me get on, they're like, we're just not even going to listen today. But I just don't – there's not a lot of wins on this schedule, and I just don't like this team. I am just really not a big Tanner Morgan fan. So I struggle to like what this offense can do, especially in a very good Big Ten from a defensive perspective. You look at the fact they returned their whole offensive line. Their defense is terrible. They are going to run the ball a lot too. So relying on Tanner Morgan isn't going to be as big of a deal unless they are in a time situation where they need to put a lot of points on the board because they're down, which is never a very good situation for Tanner Morgan to be in. He's not a Patrick Mahomes. He's a guy who needs to be playing within structure. He's a guy who needs to have quick passes out, and it's just not going to work for him.
I mean, listen, Tanner Morgan had one of the most efficient seasons a quarterback has ever had in 2019 in the history of college football. It ranks in the top 20, which is pretty remarkable considering a Minnesota quarterback really hasn't been up there for the most part. And not to knock Tanner Morgan, because you can only play with the people with you, but he took advantage of a great offensive system with 2 now NFL wide receivers in Rashad Bateman and Tyler Johnson. So without them there, we did not see that same level of production last season, and Tanner Morgan was a lot more inconsistent than we had seen in 2019. I think Minnesota will put out a product on the field that more closely resembles 2019 than 2020. I just don't know if it's enough to go over 7 wins. The other team you brought up that jumped off the page to you was Nebraska. We set it at 5.5. BetOnline has it at 6. Again, the over juice to -130. Like Andrew said, they expect a lot of hype on the Huskers, as always is the case in the offseason. So they want to make sure they can recoup some of those bets and not just have everybody come in on the over and then they're paying out a bunch. So I think Nebraska has a shot of getting to 6, but I think 6 is a great mark because, again, for Nebraska, it is such a tough schedule. It is really every year, but to have Illinois to open up the year, I don't expect Illinois to be great this year. Neither does BetOnline. They have them at 3.5. But Buffalo is a good MAC team that now has a lot of people changing over, so we'll see exactly what happens there. As Lance Leipold left, he took a lot of Buffalo's talent, but then you have Oklahoma on the road, at Michigan State, who I expect to be improved, Northwestern and Michigan at home, at Minnesota, Purdue at home. They also have a game in there against Fordham. I forgot about that week 1, but whatever. Ohio State at home, and then they end the year at Wisconsin and Iowa on Black Friday, and that game against the Hawkeyes is always competitive, but if they can get 6 wins there, fantastic. I think that is an accomplishment. I don't say that in a bad way, but to push BetOnline's team win total, I think would be a great year for Scott Frost and company in 2021.
Completely agree. I mean, but the first part of their schedule isn't too bad. They should be at 3-0. One of the issues they had 2 years ago was they just got off to such a bad start. I believe one of their games was canceled. They were trying to get another makeup game in. They lost a game early. I mean, they just get off to such bad starts. By the end of the season, they're kind of playing relatively well in the tougher part of their schedule. I look at this, the way they play Iowa, and Iowa's a team that they play up to their competition, and sometimes they play down to their competition as well because they are a team that moves a little bit slower. They're a little more methodical, and if you can find a way to stop that, you can get them out of the rhythm. When I look at that, though, Nebraska does have some talent returning. Obviously, it's always tough to gauge how good Nebraska is going into fall because every report coming out of camp is always that Nebraska is the best team since 1998. Nebraska. I mean, that's what it seems like, but they do have Oliver Martin on that side. You have, Adrian Martinez. Like, I expect him to be a bit better. He's struggled the last couple of years. My biggest issue with them is the fact they're so darn gimmicky in the red zone. They don't rely on some of the things they do pretty well in between the hashes or between the 20s to get down to the red zone. And the fact that they don't utilize their playmakers very well, Scott Frost should have a better sense of that. And I think if he does, and if they can get off to a hot start, they can actually catapult that into a relatively good season. I mean, if you get off to a 3-0 start, you play Oklahoma well. I don't think you win that game. You play them well, and you beat Michigan State and Northwestern. I think those are winnable games. You're at 5-1 going into Michigan, Minnesota, Purdue, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Iowa. That's a tough stretch. But you get 5-1 before that stretch, you've got to be feeling pretty darn good about this team.
Right. But I was about to echo your point there. Their final month of the regular season, really starting in November with Ohio State. It goes Ohio State bye week, or Wisconsin, and then Iowa. If they don't get to 6 wins, if they're not bowl eligible by the start of November, I think it's going to be very tough for Nebraska to get that 6th win unless they pull a monumental upset at that point of the season. But I agree with Andrew. There's a good chance they could win 5 of their first 6 games and then maybe pick up 1 more. And now you're talking bowl eligibility. You're talking maybe even getting over the line that BetOnline set. So we have a couple more minutes here, Andrew Wade. I want to get your thoughts on the Iowa Hawkeyes. We'll end with that one. But first, another team that we talked about, the Wisconsin Badgers, who has the highest win total set by BetOnline at 9.5. However, when we're talking about juice, as you lay your wagers, the under is -140 of that 9.5 total set by BetOnline. What did you make of that number?
That's interesting. They put it at -140. Wisconsin's a very interesting team coming into this year because they didn't lose that much. And offensively, you've got to expect Graham Mertz to play up the Graham Mertz that happened before they went on a COVID shutdown, right? So, and that was good. I mean, that was so fun to watch. I hated how fun it was to watch Wisconsin football that first week against Illinois. Obviously, we saw what Illinois did, and that wasn't very good over the course of the season. But Wisconsin is traditionally a 9, 10, 11 win team. I just obviously covered 1/3 or 1/4 of the entire possible outcomes there, but they're usually a 9, 10, 11 win team in the Big Ten and usually bordering on that 10 to 11 wins. They take care of business in the non-conference schedule. They have a pretty decent draw from a conference schedule. To me, though, I'm trying not to be a homer for Iowa, right? It's very tough to try to come on here and not be a complete homer. I don't think I would take Wisconsin at -140 under 9.5.
Yeah.
That just isn't a good return for what probably could happen. Honestly, just because I do like to get a little bit more money back on my return, I would probably take Wisconsin over the 9.5 just because of what they've done consistently. And I think as long as they beat Iowa, I think they will be a 10-win team.
I think Wisconsin is a 10-win team. I think it's more likely, though, that Wisconsin finishes with 9 or 10 wins than it is that they would finish with 8 or 11. But I think Wisconsin is a 10-win team. And if you're giving me plus money to the over, I'm going to take that all day. In fact, I've already laid a bet at BetOnline on the over of the 9.5. I look at Wisconsin's schedule, and it's a tough start, right? You go at Penn State week number 1, but based on what I have seen and based on the talent, I would still probably think Wisconsin. Actually, I think they've set some lines for that. I'll check and see who's favored there, but I would probably lean Wisconsin. But even that's a toss-up game. So then you have Eastern Michigan or Eastern Illinois, whatever that is, and then Notre Dame and Michigan, but both at home. Notre Dame is at Wrigley or somewhere. I'll figure that out too. Regardless, I think Wisconsin, if they start 3-1 out of that first 4, or they even start 2-2, like there's still a chance they could run the table because the rest of their schedule is pretty easy, all things considered. Illinois and Purdue are your 2 road games. You also finish at Minnesota as well. The crossover, though, outside of Penn State, Michigan early on, you have Rutgers, but you have Northwestern, Nebraska, and Iowa. And that game against Iowa to round out October, Halloween weekend, will be the game I think that decides the Big Ten West. But to have that at home in Camp Randall, where we expect full capacity this year, that's a huge blessing for Wisconsin.
It's annoying. Camp Randall is so tough to play at. It's one of those places where you see a team and you say, okay, these teams are equal on paper. If there's a Camp Randall, you give Wisconsin the W there. You kind of have to assume it's going to be a W. I look at their first 4 games and I expect a win against Penn State, a win against Eastern Michigan. I think they could beat Notre Dame. That's going to be an interesting game with Jack Cohn on the other side, and then definitely beat Michigan. I think there's a better chance to go 3-1 in those 4 games, if not 4-0, and then you're set up real nicely for the rest of their schedule. I also looked it up real quick. 8 of the last 13 years, Wisconsin has won 10 games, and let me see, 5 of the last 7 they've won 10 games. So all in the Paul Chris area, obviously the Barry Alvarez, Gary Anderson area as well for one of those seasons. But they're just a model of consistency in the Big Ten, and I don't see anyone putting them down this year. And I think it's going to be Iowa just got got a crappy draw on that one. I don't think it's Iowa's year this year to get over that hump.
And I'm also looking down at my phone right now because I need to confirm who the new Wisconsin athletic director is that they named this week. This is coming from my good friend George Balecki. If you can see this, our text messages. Chris McIntosh is the new athletic director named for Wisconsin Athletics. He takes over, obviously, for the Dawn. Barry Alvarez, who's retiring at the end of this month of June. Chris McIntosh, a former Wisconsin offensive lineman, a former first-round pick of the Seattle Seahawks, will now be the athletic director in Madison. So kudos to them there. We'll see how his first football season goes this upcoming fall. Let's finish with the Iowa Hawkeyes. BetOnline and us, or me, I guess, because you don't want any part of it, but BetOnline and myself here on the Locked On Big Ten podcast set the same line. It's 8.5 for the Hawks. What do you make of that number? We going over? We going under?
Well, I mean, this is me being incredibly biased. I'm going to take the over every single time because I bet on Iowa to win all the time.
I think that makes sense, though. Yeah,
I mean, I kind of have to. I just if I think they're going to lose, I just don't bet on it because I just can't bet on. I just don't like it.
Right.
When I look at the schedule, though, it basically comes down to the first two games. If they win those first two games, Iowa's going to get over the 8.5 game mark. After that, it's not, I don't want to say smooth sailing, but it kind of is. I mean, you could expect them to go 7-0 heading into the Wisconsin game. I mean, that's how good of a schedule they have after Indiana, after Iowa State. The good thing about Indiana, I think Indiana has the ability to beat Iowa. I think they're more talented than Iowa, potentially, at least from some of the skill positions, i.e. quarterback for sure. I would take Michael Penix Jr. over Spencer Petras any day.
Right.
That game being in Iowa City is such a huge advantage for the Hawks that I think that's going to be you got to chalk it up to a W. That Kinnick is going to be bumping. Kinnick got like 8,000 or 9,000 people for their spring game, and more people wanted to go. I mean, people are itching for Iowa football. It sucks for Indiana to have to play that game. Iowa State's going to be quite a match, which is going to be miserable to watch.
Chills already.
Yeah, what a game that's going to be. But I think Iowa can match up well with them as well. Iowa State likes to the ball. Breece Hall runs the ball well. Obviously, Breece Hall is one of the best running backs in the entire country, but Iowa's defense is their bread and butter this year, more so than every other year. I mean, their defense is what holds them in games, but this year their defense, in my opinion, has the potential to be legendary. They have, I would consider, probably a top 3 secondary returning. They have a linebacker group that both those guys could be All-Americans one day. And their defensive line is the weakness. But as we've seen the last 3 seasons, they've replaced at least 3 defensive linemen every single year and somehow managed to turn out more All-Americans and an even better defensive line. So to me, I'm pretty excited to watch that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I take Iowa the over, though. I think they do win those first 2 games, and they roll from there.
To echo your point about the defensive line, and listen, I was coming in a little bit green to last year's Big Ten football season, but I didn't know who Davion Nixon was until we got underway. I'm sure people that covered Iowa on a daily basis or really had a focus on the Big Ten knew who Davion Nixon was, but the Big Ten Defender of the Year, in my mind, kind of came out of nowhere, and he was an absolute freak and a force within the Big Ten Conference. So I agree. I think Iowa is going to be very, very good this year. Let's not forget also, after starting 0-2, they won their final 6 games of the 2020 season, showing that progress as well. I think Spencer Petras takes the next step. To have Tyler Goodson back is going to be huge. Tyrone Tracy is going to be huge. Don't laugh when I say nice things about Spencer Petras. Come on, that's not very nice.
I hope he does.
Yeah, I mean, their offensive line is going to be great. I think Iowa and Wisconsin, I really think it will come down to that game in October, the final weekend of it, to decide who wins the Big Ten West this year. But I would also take the over of Iowa's schedule as well. To start off the season the way Iowa does, you are going to learn what the ceiling for this team is very, very quickly. Because if they start off 2-0 in what is potentially 2 top 15, top 20 matchups, this could be a team that wins 10 or 11 games, like sincerely. Like I really think that could be the case. Their toughest crossover game is at home versus Penn State, but the other 2 crossovers at Maryland, and where's the other one? Oh, it's Indiana. So at home. At least they have 2 of them at home. So
what a draw.
Listen, I think Indiana, that's going to be a great game. My one concern for the Hoosiers is what is the health of Michael Penix Jr. That will be his first game action. I mean, it's everybody's first game action, but his first game action coming off that ACL surgery. You know, maybe if this game was week 5, I would feel differently about it. I think it's a toss-up right now. So I like where this stands for Iowa. I would take the over of the 8.5. I took the over of the 8.5 that we set. I think we went through all the Big Ten team win totals in the West Division, and we did a great job, Andrew Wade. This was a fun Friday show. Did you have fun?
I mean, I always have a blast talking to you, buddy.
Yeah, we have a great time. All right, Andrew Wade, the host of Locked On Hawkeyes. Always a pleasure. Your mustache looks great. Don't touch it.
I'll try not to.
Yeah, you got to end the show. I was tossing you to end the show. You took the water sip at the wrong time.
That was the worst timing to do that. I didn't realize you were going to drop off right there. I didn't realize that was the end.
Andrew Wade, the host of Locked On Hawkeyes. Now that's the end.
Yep. Wait, are we done? Is it still going?